Welcome to Let's Talk, where Spokane Talks hosts seek out and discuss the latest on a variety of interesting topics to Spokane and North Idaho. Here's today's host, Mike Fitzsimmons.
Welcome to this edition of Let's Talk. I'm Mike Fitzsimmons, and I am with Al Merkel. And Al is running for office in Spokane Valley for the city council in Spokane Valley. And he's a name you may have seen on a ballot in the past, but in any event, we're going to be talking about what's coming up in the future, particularly with the primary election just around the corner. Al, welcome very much. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it.
Let's talk about the valley. You know, the people are pretty well familiar with the formation of the Spokane Valley and the representation issues that occurred and all the rest of that sort of thing.
That's right.
And as of today, it's a vibrant, like the fifth largest city in the state of Washington.
It is.
89,000, I think, or more than that now.
More. That's right.
And it's a great place to live. Beautiful natural resources.
So.
It's a gorgeous part of the country.
It certainly is.
No question about it.
Most beautiful city I've ever seen.
But it also is a little inexperienced in self-governance.
I agree with that.
And you have some rather unique and interesting experiences speaking about governance. If you don't know this, Al was worked for about 10 years for the United States government for USAID, and was stationed in a number of foreign countries, some of the most tumultuous on the planet, to say the least. So you got a rather interesting hands-on education about self-governance and what can go right and what can go wrong. How do you apply that to Spokane Valley?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I would say it's kind of a twofold, and the first point you made, which was how do things go right, how do things go wrong. I've definitely seen the worst possible ways that government can run in many of the countries that I've been in, understanding that relationships are very important, but at the same time they can be a double-edged sword. Sitting on relationships, leaning on relationships only, and not really following through with process and making sure that your government is running correctly, that can be a big problem too. On the second side of it, I would say the economic side, the economic development side. That's really the background that I lean on coming into this election, coming into this race. It's very important to me. Going around to these different countries, understanding how do you build an economy. And again, it's not a government-led effort necessarily, but government participates through leadership, through bringing people to the table, through understanding concerns, through making sure that the city functions are correct. And that's a lot of what I saw overseas. And I want to bring that application here through that economic development aspect. So part of that is understanding, why do cities develop? Why do cities get better? Why do some cities stagnate or get worse? And I guess I have a lot of experience in analyzing that issue, because when we would go into a country, that's the first step we would take. We would analyze, okay, what's going on? What are the problems? How can we fix some of those problems? And then moving that analysis into action, which is what I'm trying to do here for Spokane Valley. And really it's about looking at other examples, other salient cities that are similar demographically, similar politically, similar geographically with the city that you're dealing with, and saying, wait, is that city doing better or worse? And one or the other, why? So if it's doing better, what are the things that city is doing that the city you're trying to develop isn't doing that are leading to its success? And then how can we learn from those examples?
What can you put your finger on as perhaps number one or two issues that particular analysis reveals to you?
Sure. I would say that the two biggest issues, one, are understanding that city growth should be kind of controlled by the economy. It should be controlled economically, and not necessarily, you can have, from an economics perspective, you can have a lot of barriers in place that can lead to problems, one way or another. And I can go into that more in a second. But from the other side of it, it's understanding, what sort of industries are growing. Shoot, I lost my train of thought. We're live, right?
Yeah.
So essentially, if we're looking at traffic, we're looking at where that growth comes from. So the two biggest issues I would say in the valley are we've got unrestricted growth that's right now not regulated by the market, and on the second side, we need to look at what the future economy is bringing in. So a lot of cities like Meridian in Idaho, that's sort of a suburb city that's very similar to Spokane Valley. Why have they been growing in such a great way in terms of economy, population, average median income, while the Valley, which is a very similar city in many different ways, has not been seeing some.
Well, the Valley has a relatively short history of self-governance. I mean, it was a bedroom community to the city of Spokane for a long time. The whole issue about representation with the Spokane County Commissioners and all gave rise to the desire to build a community that was independent. And so its period of independence, if you will, is relatively short. And Meridian a little bit longer, and the Meridian also geographically a little bit further separated from another major city like Boise. So while there are parallels, they're not quite the same.
They are.
So let me ask you this, Al. In terms of that, you talk about economic development. There are parts of the area that are receiving a tremendous amount of attention. Look at the West Plains, for example, and what have you. A lot of interest coming to those locations. They don't really have, aside from a lot of undeveloped land, they don't really have anything that Spokane Valley does not have. You got a great K through 12 program. You got proximity to all these major colleges and universities and community college system. You've got the freeways, you've got the railways, you've got everything that industry looks for to locate, and yet there doesn't seem to be, while you are receiving some attention, it doesn't seem to be the big ticket items that are pointing to the Valley. Why is that?
That is a great question, Mike. And honestly, in my experience and looking at how the city council has been run, how the city has been run, I'd say it's kind of twofold. One, on the city council side, I think that the current members, and again, my opponent, Arn Woodard, would be a great exemplar of this, are really kind of not being very business friendly. They exude an attitude of sort of self-actualization. They when a business comes in, they sort of exude an attitude not wanting to be friendly towards that business. And I realize that in some cases they have been recently, they've been trying to change that attitude. But overall, I think that the attitude is sort of we're a community, we're settled, we don't have much to add to you, so don't come here. We're not really willing to court you. And I think that's kind of problematic on the one side. On the second side, I think there's some city edifices, some city structures that have been set up that I just don't necessarily think are doing the best job. When you look at the Department for Economic Development, I think they've got some great staff members, but I don't see a lot of real attention going that direction. There have been a lot of contracts that have gone out for lobbying firms and things of that nature. They said so far they've been focusing a lot on bringing in kind of box restaurants, kind of like Red Robin style restaurants and things like that, and some bigger box stores, which to me is a little puzzling.
It's fine, but not big jobs. I mean, you get half a dozen jobs, a dozen, 2 dozen. That's great.
Exactly.
But you want 300, 500, 700 type jobs,
and it's also old economy. We're talking about retail stores that basically, I mean, everybody knows that retail is kind of like going the way of the dinosaur. Your box retail stores are being replaced by Amazons and things of that nature.
So what kind of energy do you intend to bring then? If there's this attitude that we'd love to have you, but we're not going to go out of our way to bring you here, what does Al Merkel do that's different?
Absolutely. So for me, it's about being solution driven. It's about really understanding what. Again, going back to that economic analysis that we were talking about before, what brings these companies here? And it's understanding that part of what brings these companies is courting them, is directly going to them and saying, hey, what are you looking for? How can we make this work in a more friendly basis, and also with more direct involvement from governance? Because that's part of the problem too, is we rely on lobbying contractors, and oftentimes our city council members don't go with them. They don't show that direct, we're really ready to do this. So that for me, being directly involved with some of those conversations, that's something that I'd like to bring to the table. But on the second side of it, it's understanding that there are some soft issues in the valley that are missing. For instance, everybody knows about Perry Street, or now Kendall Yards is the big conversation. Right. These districts, I mean, they're great, for local populace, they're great for bringing that kind of stuff, but they're also extremely good for business. And that's one of those things that if you were looking for a missing piece in the valley to really make us a community that would bring those kinds of businesses, the the Amazons and that nature. That's what we need, is some sort of center of culture that'll bring those folks in. And even in my last election, I was talking about establishing business improvement districts that I think would be great for bringing in those kinds of companies.
On the positive side, you have a lot of land available, just like the West Plains does, perhaps not as much as you head west that's available, but notwithstanding, certainly enough to do a lot of things for a long, long time.
Absolutely.
You have a great K through 12 program. You've got a well-developed infrastructure out there that's relatively new, and in many communities you compete with, the infrastructure is not relatively new.
Right.
The development and the homes, the average age of homes in the Spokane Valley area is decidedly less than it is in other locations. All of which is good. A well-developed community, but when one says, well, so what is the center of Spokane Valley? If you were going to go to the town center, where would you go? and really, at this point, the answer is I'm not quite sure. There's a new city hall out there, but it used to be part of an office building at one time and a shopping center. So the question is, and this is the cultural thing you're getting at, but that isn't necessarily a matter of concrete and glass.
No.
It's a state of mind.
Right.
How do you develop that? What kind of leadership is it going to take, and what kind of leadership can you bring to that?
Absolutely, and that again is coming back to that direct involvement. You know, we've had council members, some of which, again, my opponent, have been on there for a really long time, and their participation in some of the boards that they sit on is often lacking. Again, my opponent often doesn't show up to many of the boards he's appointed to. But that's sort of one piece of it. Those appointed boards, you know, they're nice, but establishing that business leadership, really going in and talking to who are the business futures, that's something that I want to get into. I've spoken with a lot of the greater Spokane, I can't remember the name exactly, but there's sort of an entity that connects all of the Spokane restaurants, the newer ones, you know, sort of the newer chefs, and I've been speaking with a lot of them. It's really getting in and going face to face with business leaders in the community to sort of say, hey, I understand that you know, you guys have a great business, but what can we do from the government side, from the government basis, to sort of help, you know, drive that business? And again, business improvement districts, which are not a government-led entity, but they are an entity that is established, that is helped by government, that is assisted by government, and bringing that leadership to the table to sort of bring the right folks to the table and say, hey, this would be something the city would want and support. That's something that city government can do that basically is free to taxpayers.
How would you increase or develop or cultivate a better relationship between the citizens and the government? Because there seems to be an almost arm's length relationship in the valley, kind of like we're the government, you're the citizens. You know, we're happy to hear from you, but let's not overdo it. And there's a lot of times people thinking nobody's ever listening to us.
Oh man, I can't tell you exactly. You really nailed it right on the vein. That is exactly one of the biggest problems that we have between our city leaders, and in fact they show it by doing things like restricting comment times and using process and procedure to make sure that people can't speak. It's a very strange sort of way to run, you know, the government, again, led by my opponent, Arn Woodard, amongst others on there. That to me is absolutely backwards. I want to open that comment time back up, but in addition, just in my own neighborhood and other places, you know, I give my phone number out freely. I am always ready to go and meet with folks. So it's twofold. It's one, not using our government process and procedures up in the city council meetings to restrict comment and to restrict that local involvement. But two, it's also making sure that we've got the biggest podium in the city. You know, we need to not just use that at the council meeting, but we need to be out in the community meeting with folks in a way that allows people to come and talk to us, not just sort of in back rooms.
Does the council ever take it on the road, as it were? Or you have to come to them?
They, I mean, I would say that they make a lot of emphasis about, oh, you know, we meet people for one-on-one coffees and things like that, you know, but I think when the rubber really meets the road in terms of taking negative criticism, especially, the majority that's currently on the council, including my opponent, is really been opposed to that. anytime that any kind of negative criticism comes up, they want to silence that immediately and move away from it. And that, to me, I welcome negative criticism. The best kind of government is the kind of government that says, hey, if you've got a problem with what I'm doing, please let me know, because then I can do things better. And that's something that I want to bring, is that welcoming attitude towards anybody, including my political opponents, to come speak and bring all of their concerns to the table so we can really get them addressed.
In a very simple answer, why should people in the Spokane Valley elect Al Merkel for their city council? What's the number one thing they ought to think about when they go to the polls?
That's a great question. The number one thing I would say for this election, and the most important thing that's going on with our city, and I've talked a lot about economic development, those are important things, but right now our city is overheating. The growth is uncontrolled. Every single person in the valley right now has seen the apartments coming up like dandelions all over the place, blocking traffic, causing school overload problems and all the rest. And I have a plan, a distinct plan, to come in and control that using economics. So using the market, basically to free up the market to make those who develop costs, who cause costs, pay for those costs, whereas the rest of the taxpayers shouldn't have to. So I would say neighborhood integrity, making sure that your neighborhood feel the community that we've all grown up with kind of stays fostered, while at the same time the city continues to grow both economically and, population-wise, but basically taking us into the next level of cityhood.
All right, and in the process of doing that, what are some of the things you would do constructively, specifically, to move in that direction? That's
great. The first thing I would do specifically would be bring back developer agreements with the city that would include essentially all of the impact costs that a development might have. So we would do a distinct analysis to look at a multifamily development, for instance, and say, okay, you're going into a neighborhood that doesn't have sidewalks, you're increasing the density by X amount, that's going to require sidewalks, so you're going to have to pay for that. You're looking at a neighborhood that doesn't have a divided road. Well, now you're going to need a divided road to, again, take care of the density that you're looking at, so you're going to have to pay for that. So basically what it does is it shifts the costs that right now are being borne by me and Joe taxpayer to really make these apartment complexes run back onto the people who are causing those costs. So it's not sort of a top-down government movement where you're saying, oh, we're going to zone here, we're going to zone there, because you never get that quite right. You basically say, hey, you can build what you're looking to build, but this is what it's going to cost you for the impacts. And I think that when you look at the economics of the situation, a lot of those apartment complex owners would say, okay, before we build in this neighborhood, let's take it back to an area like Pines or Sprague or Broadway, where those where the impacts would be minimal because they already have sidewalks, they already have traffic control devices, etc., and purchase maybe some of the land, because a lot of us in the valley know that, for instance, on Pines, there's still a lot of houses that are right on Pines, right. And why aren't those properties being looked at first before you look at an empty lot that's in some neighborhood that has 5 houses? And right now the reason is because the market justifications don't make sense, but they would under my plan.
On the other side of the coin, though, you want growth.
We do.
And that's part of how the revenue base makes it possible to provide the services that the government needs to provide.
Right.
And you want to provide some incentives to folks to ordered growth, of course, and that sort of thing. But so what about the incentive side? What do you do to incentivize those developers rather than simply say, well, this is what it's going to cost you?
That's a great point. Again, what you said was we want growth, but we want ordered growth. Right now, the demand side of this curve is huge. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know that these developers need much incentive at this point. They are really excited to be putting in developments anywhere that they possibly could.
Economies run in cycles, and
that's true.
There's going to be a day when that happens.
There is going to be a day when that happens, and when that day comes, I think we would have to look at this specifically. But I would say the incentives are already there in a lot of these areas. So this is really about continuing the growth pattern, but at the same time, using economics to move that growth pattern to the places where people would expect it to exist, rather than right now it's happening in places where people don't expect it to exist because we've got the wrong incentives in place.
And they're wondering, who's in charge? Why is this going on this way?
That's exactly what folks are wondering. That's exactly what the conversation is right now, and I'd say that's why I'm running, to kind of answer that question and say, hey, there are people in charge, or there are people who want to be in charge, who want to look out for your neighborhood integrity, who want to make sure that your city grows in a way that makes sense to you.
Some short questions and answers here.
Absolutely.
What are people telling you when you go to an event or meet people on the street? What are you hearing? What are you hearing more consistently than anything else?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is sort of a general fear and misunderstanding of what's going on with the government. We talked about that a little bit earlier when you were, talking about the attitude that's going on at the city council, this arm's length. And folks, I would say in the history of Spokane Valley, you know what I mean? Up until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, folks were okay with this sort of arm's length kind of relationship because there was so much land. And,
they were used to it.
Yeah, and folks didn't really pay attention. But now that we're starting to get up to that capacity, especially on the livable land that's in the valley that's developed, now folks are starting to really get worried. They're starting to say, wait, these multifamily complexes really affect my property values considerably. The crime rates are increasing. I'm getting worried about things, and I'm worried that when I come and make my feelings known to the city council, nobody seems to A, care about what I'm saying, or B, even understand what my problems are. The city council seems to be very pro-developers and not pro-citizens, and so there's a lot of sort of fear and anger and frustration with how the government is working right now. And that again is what I'm trying to respond to say, hey, you need somebody on the council who's ready to listen. You need somebody on the council who's got solutions and ideas that come from a different side of the market, which I definitely provide. And you need somebody on the council who's a friendly face.
You are one of the closest border cities of size in the state of Washington.
Right.
We always hear about Vancouver and Portland, but you are on the Idaho border next to a very fast-growing city, Coeur d'Alene, and there are things happening from the state legislative standpoint in the state of Washington, as well as from the county, as well as from the city government in Spokane Valley, that affect the attractability of industry. You still need a lot of small business and that sort of thing to develop. That make people say, well, this side of the border or that side of the border. So what are you going to do to make sure that they say, all right, this side of the border?
That's a great question. And again, it comes back to first understanding what brings those companies in and kind of stepping in front of those companies. So even before you speak with them, stepping in to say, okay, this is what makes, we understand that. So business improvement districts, that cultural side, when you compare Coeur d'Alene to why is Coeur d'Alene growing versus Spokane Valley, I mean, again, it really has to come down to culture. I mean, folks want to go to Coeur d'Alene because they have this beautiful art district. They have sort of that main street that has all these nice little shops and eateries and fancy places. That's what's attracting folks to go there. And we need something that competes with that over in the valley. So that to me is the biggest issue. But then secondarily, it's also making sure that the city makes sense, because right now a lot of our traffic patterns are really starting to become problematic. And that goes right back to what I was saying about the construction issues that I'm looking at. But then that third piece is really sitting down and meeting with them and showing that city leadership that we want to be involved with these companies, that we want to go out and court them, that we want to bring them in. And in fact, I've been trying to do that even already. I speak with companies all the time over in the Coeur d'Alene side, especially on the tech industry side, to say, hey, why did you locate there instead of here? And a lot of what I'm saying is what they're saying.
Part of what you would have to be as a councilman is a voice for the citizens of Spokane Valley relative to the Washington State Legislature.
Yes, sir.
And a lot of times people in eastern Washington look at the Washington State Legislature and say, I don't know whether you realize we're over here.
Yeah.
All right. So in terms of an advocacy,
yeah,
what would you do with respect to the leadership in Olympia?
That's a great question. I think when I've been looking at the issues that are really looking at cities right now, and this one's gonna kind of surprise folks, but for me, the marijuana tax is a big problem. When you look at the amount of revenue that was brought into to Washington State and the way that tax was redistributed to cities, so Spokane Valley is amongst the top 5, if not number 1 or number 2, for bringing in that marijuana tax revenue that's going to the state legislature. On the flip side, out of, I think, $100-some billion that was made last year in terms of that marijuana revenue tax, only $300,000 came back to the Valley City to support our city and all of the issues that additional marijuana sales causes, and one way or another, you can be pro marijuana or against marijuana. The law already exists. We're already bringing in the revenue. We all realize that the sales, they probably cause similar problems to bars, etc. And our city has to deal with them. But for me to look at the fact that we're only getting $300,000 from the legislature back, that's an atrocity out of hundreds of billions. Even if it was $1 million, $2 million, our entire city budget is only about $39 million a year, and $2 million out of $160 billion is almost nothing. That, to me, is where we need to look at the main point of advocacy. We need to bring some of that money back into our city to be able to use for our citizens, because if we're going to have to support, the sales of this product, et cetera, we should be able to earn some of the revenue back for it.
Policing. You're under contract with the Spokane County Sheriff's Department.
Yes.
Do you like that? Is that a better deal, or do you think that city of Spokane Valley should have its own police force?
I'm really glad that you asked that question. So my background, you were talking about with USAID, right. And even my current job, I'm a contracts officer, is, I could say, sort of my speciality amongst all of the places that I've worked. So contracting is really a great tool, I think. And when it comes to the policing contract, I think that is the neatest thing that we have, is a policing contract, as just being a contract right now. And the reason is because with a contract, you can place incentives to the contractor to do work, but you can also put disincentives if the contractor doesn't produce the kinds of results that you're looking for. Sure. So that's the great news about having a contract in general. However, the current contract that we've had, and this is, I've spoken to Ozzy about this on many occasions, the current contract that we have is what us in the business would term a time and materials contract, which basically, without getting in real technical, essentially means that we pay for the direct costs that the sheriff department uses. I would love to transfer that into an incentive-based contract, where instead of paying for the inputs, whatever the sheriff might need in terms of staff time, et cetera, we pay for the outputs. So we change the contract around to say, and this is spitballing, but crime rate reduces by 3%, then we pay a certain amount, things like that, and really unrestrict the sheriff's office, because right now, a lot of the arguments over this, whether we should have a Spokane Valley City Police Department versus a contract, is because the current council members, my opponent included, Arn Woodard, say, you should have 16 cops here and 5 cops there, and this, and I'm like, who are you guys to be that kind of expert, right? I mean, we ostensibly hire the expert to tell us what we should be doing. We should untie his hands, let him make the decisions that really result in the results that we're looking for. And that, to me, is how we should change the contract. So I'm definitely in favor of it, because ultimately, if we have an incentive-based contract, say we pay 80% out in costs and we reserve 20% as an incentive fee for delivering the results that we're looking for, if at the end of the period those results haven't been delivered, well, that's 20% savings we have to come up with another solution. And that right now is not what our contract looks like, but it should be.
Would the Spokane County Sheriff's Department be open to that sort of thing?
I think so, because I think that conversation in terms of what results could we really expect, that, again, would be driven by that relationship with the Sheriff's Department to say, okay, Ozzy, you tell me, what could you possibly deliver? What are the things that we could look for if we untied your hands in terms of resources and et cetera? We made it, sort of if you say that it's going to cost $100,000, we say, okay, we're going to pay you $70,000 a year. Use it however you want. You know what I mean? If you think we only need 4 officers and then tomorrow you think you need 20, or you think you need to pay your officers double, or whatever it is that you think that you need to do, great, do it, because at the end of the year, what we're looking for is results. We're looking, I don't think the average police or the average citizen in the community is sitting around thinking, man, I wish there were 16 cops instead of 15, because then things would get a lot better. I don't think that really matters to the average citizen. I think what they're worried about is, I don't want my stuff being stolen. I don't want people breaking into my house. I don't want et cetera, et cetera. And however that gets taken care of, great.
Let's presume that you prevail in the primary and that you prevail in the general election this fall.
Thanks. I'd like that presumption.
What is the first thing legislatively you intend to work on? Number one priority for Al Merkel.
That number one priority, coming back to it, is that neighborhood integrity issue. For me, that is the most dangerous thing in terms of planning of the city, because once something is built, it's really hard to unbuild it. And once we have these, we're kind of at that crucial stage right now where there's still a little bit of land available in different neighborhoods, et cetera, that could be turned into these multifamily complexes. And once that happens, we have to live with the traffic problems. We have to live with the improvement costs that the city has to bear, et cetera. So we really need to jump on this problem right away. So my intention would be to try and introduce legislation to temporarily curb business licenses while we evaluate construction licenses, while we evaluate how can we make this better, and again, coming back to my true cost methodology, which is really looking at making sure that the costs of development go to the people who are developing rather than to the taxpayers. So once we got that right, and I'd love to see the council focus on that for 3 or 4 months, that would be the legislation that I would intend to put in. That's where all of my efforts would be, so that by this time next year, we would have a much better development licensing structure in the city.
He is Al Merkel, and he is running for city council in Spokane Valley. And this is Let's Talk. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Mike.
Let's Talk is produced in Spokane, Washington by Spokane Talks Media, which is solely responsible for its content. Ask a question, recommend a guest, and hear this program again online anytime at SpokaneTalksMedia.com. We wish you a great day.